On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, a man walked into Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, though history would remember him as D.B. Cooper, thanks to a media typo that stuck forever. He paid $20 in cash for a Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short 30-minute trip on a Boeing 727. Nothing seemed unusual. The man was described as polite, calm, mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, wearing a black suit, a white shirt, and a black tie with the tie clip. He carried only a black briefcase and a brown paper bag. When he boarded the plane, he took seat 18C near the rear. Flight 305 had 36 passengers and 6 crew members. At around 3 p.m., the plane took off as scheduled. Moments after takeoff, Cooper quietly handed a folded note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. At first, Schaffner assumed it was another passenger flirting. She slipped the note unopened into her pocket. Cooper leaned toward her and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note was written in neat capital letters. It said, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me." Florence sat down next to him, trying to remain composed. Cooper opened his briefcase just enough for her to see 8 red cylinders attached to wires and a large battery. Whether it was real or fake, no one ever found out, but it looked convincing. He then dictated his demands calmly: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready to refuel the plane upon arrival in Seattle. He wanted everything ready by the time they landed. Schaffner walked to the cockpit and informed the pilots. The captain, William Scott, immediately radioed air traffic control, who contacted the FBI.
The request was relayed to authorities in Seattle. The airline's president, Donald Nyrop, authorized payment. No chances were taken with passenger lives. The FBI assembled the ransom and $200,000 in $20 bills, mostly used, unmarked notes. Each bill's serial number was recorded. As the plane continued toward Seattle, Cooper remained calm and collected.
He ordered a bourbon and soda, paid for it, and even offered to pay Schaffner's drink later. He wore dark sunglasses. He spoke little but politely, avoiding small talk. He seemed familiar with aircraft, mentioning details about the Boeing 727's rear air stairs and its flight mechanics. At one point, he looked out the window and remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there." He knew the terrain. Meanwhile, on the ground, Seattle authorities scrambled. They alerted the media but instructed them not to broadcast details until after the hostages were safe. At 5:39 p.m., Flight 305 finally began its descent into Seattle. Cooper's instructions were precise. No one was to approach the plane after landing except a refueling truck and a company representative carrying the money and parachutes. He wanted the lights in the cabin dimmed. The passengers were to remain on board until the ransom was delivered. The FBI complied exactly. When the plane landed, it parked on an isolated section of the runway. Armed agents surrounded it from a distance. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow went to retrieve the ransom and parachutes from the ground crew through the rear stairs under Cooper's watch. Once the demands were met, Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants to leave. Only 4 people remained on board: Cooper, pilot Scott, co-pilot Rita Zak, flight engineer H.E. Anderson, and Tina Mucklow. After everyone else left, Cooper outlined his next set of instructions. The plane would take off again, heading toward Mexico City. It would fly at 10,000 feet below 200 knots, with the landing gear down and the cabin unpressurized. The rear air stairs would remain deployed after takeoff. The pilots objected that flying that far under those conditions wasn't possible without refueling. Cooper agreed to a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. At 7:40 p.m., with all preparations done, the plane took off again, this time only Cooper and the 4 crew members aboard. The FBI tracked the flight on radar, but they couldn't follow directly. No fighter jets were equipped to fly that slow. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper ordered the crew to stay in the cockpit with the curtain closed. He told Tina Mucklow to sit in the jump seat facing the cockpit and not to move. She noticed him tying something around his waist and handling the money bag. At 8 p.m., a warning light in the cockpit indicated the rear stairway had been lowered. The pilots asked over the intercom if he needed assistance. Cooper's calm reply came back, no, that was the last time anyone ever heard his voice. At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft suddenly shifted upward like it had lost weight. The pilots corrected the pressure change. They guessed Cooper had jumped. The plane continued to Reno and landed safely at 10:15 p.m. Law enforcement swarmed it immediately. Cooper was gone. The rear stairs were open, flapping in the wind. The crew was unharmed. Inside, investigators found 2 of the parachutes unused. A black tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip, 8 cigarette butts. No briefcase, no bomb, no money. Outside, there was nothing but dark forest and cold November rain. Cooper had jumped somewhere over southwestern Washington, possibly near Mount St. Helens, Ariel, or Woodland. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history that night. They called it NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. More than 1,000 troops, dogs, helicopters, and aircraft combed the suspected landing zone. The weather had been brutal, freezing rain and strong winds. Visibility was near zero. No parachute, no body, no money turned up. Nothing. Weeks turned into months, then into years. The FBI investigated hundreds of suspects. Ex-cons, missing persons, even soldiers with parachute training were questioned. One by one, they were eliminated. The only hard evidence was Cooper's tie, cigarette butts, and the money serial numbers. The FBI distributed the serial list to every bank, casino, and business in the country. Still, no bills surfaced. In 1972, the FBI conducted recreations of the jump using the same Boeing 727 and similar conditions. Parachuting experts agreed it was a nearly suicidal jump, at night, in a storm, at 10,000 feet over rugged wilderness, without proper gear. Cooper wore loafers, a business suit, and a trench coat. The odds were against survival, yet there was no proof of his death. Some believed Cooper was an experienced paratrooper, possibly a veteran of the Vietnam era. Others speculated he died on impact. The FBI's official stance leaned toward the latter, but they kept the case open. Then, in February 1980, almost 9 years later, a break came. A boy named Brian Ingram, vacationing with his family on the Columbia River near 10. A Bar, Washington, uncovered rotting bundles of $20 bills buried in the sand. When examined, they totaled $5,800, still bound with rubber bands. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. The find reignited public fascination. How did the money get there? The spot was miles from the estimated drop zone and downstream from the flight path. Investigators believed the bills had been deposited there by river flooding, but no one could explain why only some of the money was found. The rest of the $200,000 was still missing. Over the next decades, more than 800 people claimed to be D.B. Cooper or knew who he was. All were debunked. Theories multiplied. Some said Cooper was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret who hijacked a plane in 1972 in a nearly identical manner. But McCoy was killed in a police shootout years later, and the FBI ruled him out. Others believed Cooper was a Boeing employee with insider knowledge of the plane. Some even speculated he was a CIA operative, or that the hijacking was part of a secret government cover-up. None of it ever added up. And then in 2016, after 45 years, the FBI finally closed the case, stating that all leads had been exhausted. But closing a file doesn't end a mystery, because to this day, no body, no parachute, and no conclusive trace of D.B. Cooper has ever been found. He jumped into history and vanished. After the night of the hijacking, the D.B. Cooper case became a national obsession. Every agency, the FBI, CIA, military got involved at some point. Yet the man who jumped out of that Boeing 727 simply disappeared into the storm. The first question investigators asked was simple. Could Cooper have survived the jump? It was around 8:13 p.m., pitch black, heavy rain, 200 miles per hour winds, and freezing temperatures. Cooper had no helmet, no altimeter, and wore only a suit, tie, and loafers. The parachute he took wasn't even steerable. It was a reserve chute meant for emergencies, not precision landings. Experts agreed the jump was near suicide, but the fact that no body was ever found made it impossible to close the case cleanly. The FBI's best estimate placed his landing somewhere near the Lewis River, southwest Washington. The terrain was dense forest, steep hills, and thick underbrush. Search teams spent weeks combing the area on foot and by air. They found nothing, not even the briefcase, parachute straps, or shoe prints. For years, the FBI's case files grew thicker, but leads grew colder. Then came the suspects, hundreds of them. Main suspects and theories: 1. Richard Floyd McCoy. One of the most convincing early suspects was Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret and Vietnam veteran. In April 1972, just 5 months after Cooper's jump, McCoy hijacked another Boeing 727 using almost the same method. He demanded $500,000, parachuted out of the rear stairs, and was later caught with most of the money at his home in Utah. McCoy matched Cooper's physical description and had the right skills, but the FBI ruled him out. The ransom bills didn't match, and McCoy was confirmed to be in Utah the day before Cooper's hijacking. Still, many believe McCoy and Cooper were connected, or even the same person, since McCoy's hijacking seemed like a copycat of Cooper's plan executed with military precision. Number 2. Kenneth Christensen. In 2003, a new theory surfaced from a man named Lyle Christensen, who believed his late brother Kenneth was D.B. Cooper. Kenneth had been a World War II paratrooper and a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, the very airline Cooper hijacked. Lyle claimed that shortly before his death in 1994, Kenneth confessed to having done something that would make him rich. Investigators discovered that Kenneth bought a house and expensive items shortly after the hijacking, despite having modest means. He also bore a resemblance to the composite sketch of Cooper, but the FBI dismissed him. There was no physical evidence linking Kenneth to the crime, and none of the ransom bills were traced to him. Number 3. Dwayne Weber. Another strong candidate was Dwayne Weber, a quiet man who on his deathbed in 1995 told his wife, "I'm D.B. Cooper." His widow, Jo Weber, later recalled that Dwayne had nightmares about leaving fingerprints on a plane, had an old knee injury like the one Cooper was rumored to have, and had kept a notebook referencing the Columbia River, where some of the ransom money was later found. When she went through his belongings, she found a Northwest Airlines ticket and a 1971 newspaper about the hijacking. The FBI investigated Weber's background and compared his DNA with the partial DNA on Cooper's tie, but the result was inconclusive. Again, the case went nowhere. Number 4. Robert Rackstraw. Then there was Robert Rackstraw, an ex-Army pilot and explosives expert. He had a criminal record, intelligence training, and even faked his own death once. Journalists later uncovered letters sent to newspapers in the 1970s signed D.B. Cooper. When analyzed, they allegedly contained coded messages that spelled Rackstraw's name. In 2016, a documentary team claimed he was the real Cooper, presenting evidence of his flight skills, survival training, and a motive: revenge against the U.S. government after being dismissed from the Army. Rackstraw denied everything until his death in 2019. The FBI never officially named him as a suspect, saying there wasn't enough proof. 5. Sheridan Peterson. A Boeing employee and skydiver named Sheridan Peterson was also considered. He worked for Boeing in the 1960s and had a reputation for high-risk jumps. He fit the age and build, and he had experience with the exact type of parachutes used. When interviewed in later years, Peterson joked about being Cooper but denied involvement. He died in 2021, never confirming or denying beyond that. Strange evidence and unanswered questions. In 1980, when the boy discovered the $5,800 on the riverbank, the FBI hoped it would reveal where Cooper had landed, but forensic tests only deepened the mystery. The bills were found buried about 20 miles from the presumed jump site, partially decomposed, but the rubber bands were still intact, meaning they hadn't been underwater for long. That suggested the money was buried years after the hijacking, not immediately after. So either Cooper or someone else returned to the area and buried it later. Adding to the confusion, soil samples showed the money had been exposed to the open air before burial, ruling out a simple river deposit. To this day, no one knows how the cash got there. The tie in modern forensics in 2007, forensic scientists re-examined Cooper's tie, the only major physical clue left.
Using advanced electron microscopy, they discovered rare titanium particles on it, material linked to the aerospace industry in the 1970s. This finding suggested Cooper might have worked at or near a Boeing manufacturing plant, where titanium was used in production.
That lined up with theories that he was either a Boeing engineer or a mechanic who knew the 727's unique stairway system, something few outsiders understood at the time. DNA testing on the tie in 2011 yielded partial profiles from multiple people, but none matched any suspects definitively. Public fascination and theories the D.B. Cooper case grew beyond a criminal investigation. It became a cultural phenomenon. Books, documentaries, and films portrayed him as a folk hero, the mysterious outlaw who outsmarted the FBI and vanished without a trace. People admired the fact that no one was hurt, no shots were fired, and he walked away with a fortune, at least in theory. But the romantic version ignores one fact. If Cooper died that night, the story is far from glamorous. Still, the case inspired waves of amateur sleuths. Online communities have analyzed flight data, weather reports, and terrain maps trying to calculate his survival odds. Some even run annual gatherings called CooperCan, dedicated to keeping the mystery alive. Later developments in 2016. After 45 years of chasing dead ends, the FBI finally closed the active investigation. The official statement said, "We will no longer actively investigate unless credible physical evidence emerges." But the case file remains archived for public study, over 60 volumes of documents, photos, and interviews. Even after that, new clues kept surfacing. In 2020, scientists analyzed diatoms, microscopic algae on the recovered money, and concluded it entered the river during springtime, months after the hijacking. That means the bills didn't fall with Cooper. Someone or something moved them later. In 2022, researchers using high-resolution mapping identified possible parachute material near the original flight path, though it hasn't been confirmed as related. Every so often, a new, final theory appears. But none have closed the case. Could he have survived? Let's look at the possibilities. If Cooper survived the jump, he would have had to navigate through freezing rain, thick forest, and deep rivers. At night, carrying 22 pounds of cash. He'd need shelter, transport, and a new identity fast. Yet no missing persons, no sudden wealth, and no trace of the money ever appeared. That suggests either he died on impact or lost the money in the wilderness. But if he did survive, he would have executed the perfect crime. No witnesses, no digital trail, no body. Legacy. The legend of D.B. Cooper endures because it defies closure. Law enforcement hates loose ends, and this one became the only unsolved air piracy case in American history. Cooper's story represents a time when one man could board a plane, light a cigarette, demand ransom, and disappear. Something impossible in today's world of scanners and surveillance. He remains a ghost, part criminal, part myth. To this day, the FBI's only official statement is this: D.B. Cooper hijacked Flight 305 on November 24, 1971, obtained $200,000 in ransom, and parachuted into the night. His identity and fate remain unknown. More than 50 years later, the mystery hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown stronger. Every time a new clue surfaces or a new theory circulates, the same question resurfaces. Did D.B. Cooper die that night, or did he truly get away with it? No one can say for sure. He jumped into his storm and into history.